Hello, and thank you for joining us today for the first edition of this new GWO Expert Series Webinar on Digitalisation and Training. I'm Ralph Savage, Head of Communication at GWO, and over the next 3 weeks, we're aiming to bring you, our community of stakeholders, together with our membership and take a look at what the future could hold as digital solutions become a more common part of the GWO training mix. We hope that in about an hour's time, we'll leave having learned something new that we can bring back into our daily lives. From our point of view, this series is really important in bringing our community together with our work. The GWO annual strategy session takes place a week after this series is over, and we're using these webinars to inform our work going forwards. Today's panelists will participate in the debate and then feed that back to the rest of our members on the 29th of September. If you logged on early, you'll have had a chance to take part in creating our word cloud, which is on screen right now. We wanted to get you thinking right from the beginning because we want you to be a part of this series too. For those of you who didn't have time, we asked for 3 words describing what good training looks like. We posed this question as a sort of line in the sand because I think we can all agree, however training is delivered, we should always start from the same place and focus on learning objectives. So thank you to everyone who provided input into this introduction. It's really interesting to see the words that come out biggest on screen. We'll have more opportunities for you to take part like this later on, but for now I'd like to introduce our panelists for today. We're very happy to have 3 experts in training delivery from our membership, plus the team here at GWO. First up is Neil Pickthall. Neil is Competency and Development Team Manager at SSE and Vice Chair of the GWO Training Committee. Prior to joining the renewable energy industry, Neil had a long and distinguished career in the Royal Air Force. His key focus areas are recruitment, development and mentoring of trainees. Elizabeth Mugind has been with MHI Vestas since 2014 and is an active participant on the GWO Training Committee. She regularly represents the OEM in relation to its global training development activities and played a major role in the delivery of today's case study on digitalisation, the Safety in Mind mobile application, which her company deploys now as part of the market's first ever blended learning solution for GWO BST refresher training. Moving on, we have Brian Smedegaard-Peterson, who, unlike Barcelona legend Lionel Messi, is a one-club man. He's been with Vestas since the early 2000s, occupying a range of roles there before moving to his current position as training development specialist in 2015. Also partial to the odd football analogy is our own Jacob Bjørn Nielsen. As Director of Training and Operations here at GWO, Jacob presides over the portfolio of GWO standards while adding his considerable management expertise to the smooth running of our secretariat. And finally, alongside me is Jacob Holst, CEO of Global Wind Organisation, who I hope needs little introduction. Jacob's been with GWO since it was formed in 2014, following a long career with Wind Denmark and before that at Wind Europe. So welcome to all of you. So on to today's agenda. First, we'll recap on why we've chosen the theme of digitalisation. What are the reasons it's become so central to our work? Jacob, you'll be providing a short tour of the key developments in digital this year before we move on to today's case study. Safety in Mind, as I said, the MHI Vestas mobile application is noted for being the first certified blended learning solution for the BST refresher standard. All in all, this should take around 20 minutes, after which we'll begin the panel discussion. We're very happy to take your questions during the debate, but please don't feel you have to wait until then. If you do have a question, just type it into the box and we'll do our best to come to it later. If we don't have time to answer your questions today, don't worry, we'll have a note of all of them and we'll spend some time afterwards going through them with our help desk team to get back to you as soon as we can. It's been a really challenging year for us all. I think that goes without saying. So firstly, we'll turn to you, Jacob, to explain why digitalisation has risen so quickly to the top of the industry agenda in 2020.
Yeah, thank you, Ralph. So we obviously had an unprecedented challenge during the lockdown. So many of you won't need reminding that for long periods, training simply wasn't possible in a conventional sense. At its worst, the network was operating at only 14% of normal capacity. And we saw more than 1,000 technicians lapsing their training every week. The status right now is that around 6,000 of those technicians have still not been able to refresh their basic safety training yet. So at the time, GWO members identified the risks of skill fade very quickly as they saw how many technicians' basic safety training would lapse unless a solution was found. And the duty of care is on them to keep turbines spinning while ensuring they send technicians out with the right skills to work safely. And we also received dozens of requests from training providers asking us, can they deliver training using digital tools? As it happened, at that time, we were actually in the process of updating our requirements for training providers to specify digital as a prescribed setting. And we also updated our requirements for certification bodies for the same reason. We now had a business imperative from COVID to start accelerating our work on digitalization, and we had to move really fast. It was actually scheduled to be released 1st of October this year. So, but 1 month after the WHO declared the global pandemic, we released the BSTR partial. This BSTR partial incorporated virtual classroom as a digital setting with delivery as a skills fade mitigation measure, and we updated the training provider requirements to facilitate digital learning as a new setting for all types of GWO training. So we fast-tracked our work. Of course, we relied as ever on the market of training providers to respond, and already by the end of June, 36 training providers were certified to deliver the BSTR partial, and an equal number were certified to deliver blended learning solutions for various of the modules.
Thanks, Jakob. It's pretty clear GWO delivered some responses to COVID-19 quite fast. How would you describe the outcomes in relation to those challenges of skills fade and the closure of training centres during lockdown?
I think we have to bear in mind that at the time we had only one training centre certified to deliver training solutions digitally, MHI Vestas. And nobody else had begun that journey yet. And we were new to it as well. Our secretariat and the team and the training committee developed the BSTR partial really fast. It took a month. We did test it. We did have some stakeholder involvement, but not nearly to the extent that we usually do. So usually it takes us about 6 months to develop a full training standard. And in this case, it took us only 1. And we sent it out to a community where no one was certified to deliver digitally yet, or only 1. And based on that, I think the result was quite good. And I'm actually very proud of what we've achieved as an association, as a team, and the training committee. That was very good work. But then again, it was very fast. And under the circumstances, it was good. But we should also be mindful that had we known better, had we been better prepared, had we foreseen an event like this, we could have presented probably a better product. And that's part of our learning and our continuous improvement, is to look at the things that we have done retrospectively and see what could we have done better, how can we improve on this. The BSTR partial in particular will be evaluated already in October. But what have we learned this past year is that's where we are right now. So I'm fairly proud of what we've done, but I also realize that we probably could have done it better if we had been all knowing. So what should we have been all knowing about? Yeah, this is really the question.
And addressing the challenges of lockdown was a major problem for everybody. So,
oh right, if I may add, really a shout out to all of those training centers who acted really quickly. Mm-hmm. You guys who were very fast at picking up the ball and starting to deliver training. You have helped technicians and our industry being better able to deliver training in these challenging circumstances.
So moving on to our case study today, which is the MHI Vestas Safety in Mind solution. I'll bring in the first of our panelists, Elizabeth. Before we ask our participants to watch a short video about the Safety in Mind solution, it's an example of distributed learning, and on screen we have some explanations of 3 training concepts. Can you tell us why a distributed learning approach was chosen for Safety in Mind?
Yes, sure I can. Again, training is essential to secure the safety of our employees working on and offshore every day. So when we started to look into becoming a GWO approved training provider, we of course also very much had the safety in mind. And what was really important for us is that we believe that safety is paramount, and having the right mindset of safety is essential to secure the safety of our employees. So we saw an opportunity with the GWO Basic Safety Training Refresher to sort of focus even more on the mindset of our employees. And when we started this process, we actually envisioned something completely different than the distributed learning and what we ended up with. But as we started the process and started to look into what was the outcome and what was it that we were looking for, it actually became visible to us that the distributed learning was a good opportunity. And it was that because we wanted to utilize the time that the people spend every other year in the classroom for refreshing their theoretical knowledge. And why not utilize that time between the 2 years as well to keep that safety mindset and to utilize the time whenever people are traveling, weather days, or whatever it could be. So that's where we saw the benefits of the distributed learning, making the theoretical part of the training available throughout the 2 years periods, and then also introducing an assessment prior to attending the practical training to ensure that people actually have the right knowledge when they would come to do the practical training. So that's why everything included, the distributed learning was the right choice for us.
Yeah, and it gives a clue as to why you named the solution Safety in Mind. We'll show a few stills of the application shortly afterwards, but for now we're just going to switch over to a video so the audience can see a couple of minutes about the solution. So I've always wanted to say this: run VT.
The GWO Basic Safety Training Refresher is a new way of looking at training, where you look at the training as a whole instead of 4 individual courses. We have developed a new concept to ensure our staff has the right mindset towards safety and also to give them the right skill set should they need it in an emergency. The Safety in Mind app is an app we have developed to create a fun learning environment, essentially a playground where you can do your theory training whenever you want to. One of the biggest benefits is that when you attend the training, you only have to attend 2 days of physical training where the theory is handled by the app, so that enables you to do it whenever you want to do it and not use a full day in a classroom.
The reason by the gamification is to give the participants a motivating way to study and have fun and learn at the same time.
It allows you to challenge yourself. It allows you to not be content with the 3rd place if you want the 1st place. And also you can gain points so you can buy new turbines and gain knowledge on them in a new and fun way. The practical scenarios enables us to train as close to reality as possible. We train in a turbine, in a real nacelle, in a real tower, so that you have the right feel for what could happen in a real life emergency.
A typical teaching situation is where the delegates have to put out a fire before he can assist the casualty and give him first aid, and then by manual handling get him out of the turbine, and by the right procedure of working at heights evacuate him from the turbine.
It's really beneficial because you get to train as close to reality as possible, so that you have all the prerequisites should you need them in an emergency.
We developed our new concept because we really care about our colleagues' safety.
So I hope you all had a chance to see the film and get a flavour of Safety in Mind. Elizabeth, the solution supports your BST refresher training. What was MHI's motivation for developing it, and what have been the critical success factors?
Yes, again, it was the focus of the mindset of our employees. We had talked about how do we actually ensure our employees are working in a safe manner out in the turbine. Could we assess that by sending people out to do assessment and stuff? And we realized, no, doing policing is not the right way. We need to have shared responsibilities to have the right mindset and to take the responsibility of our own safety every day when we are working in the turbines. So that was one of the key drivers. And then for sure also to reduce the time in the classroom, because with the refresher training, you are in the classroom every other year repeating the same knowledge. And a lot of people have been in the industry for many years, and we also want to give the credit to those people that actually do know the theoretical knowledge. And this is where, again, the app comes in handy, because it treats you with the offering of the different learning styles. And also, if you are competent and know your theoretical knowledge, know your stuff, you can quickly, fast browse through the app and get your knowledge up to date. And maybe other people need more time and need to dig deeper into the theoretical knowledge, and then that also allows it. So again, it was to look at the individuals and see what are their needs, how can we ensure that we keep the momentum of their safety mindset. And another one was, of course, to create a learning environment which is fun, and this is why we have added the gamification into the app. So again, it doesn't become a demand for the people, but actually something that they enjoy to do.
Well, thanks, Elizabeth. Hopefully we'll have a chance to go into a little bit more detail on how this kind of solution can be imagined in other contexts as we go into the panel discussion. But for now, we'll move on. So it's time again to get some feedback from you. We've posed a short question, which you can find by visiting the menti.com site and typing in the code on screen. We'll leave it up there for a few seconds and post it in the chat before we show the results. I think this is a good opportunity to bring in some thoughts from our panel. You can see 5 options on the screen. Neil, which of the 5 options would you choose and why?
That's a good question, and they're all very good options. Certainly, more efficient and flexible learning is really important. Certainly, from my experience and within my organisation, because of the demands of our staff on operational commitments, being able to undertake training, which is very important to support safety, as Elizabeth was talking to, and building general competence. Being able to do that in a more efficient and flexible way is really important. So for me, that's a big thing, a more efficient and flexible approach to training our staff and building staff competence.
Brian at Vestas. Brian, what springs out to you from these 5 options?
I would say personalized training for sure stands out for me and for Vestas. The ability to do self-paced learning is for sure something that, in my view, increases quality rather than necessarily filling a lot of different people in the same classroom. So that's one for me for sure.
Yeah. And Jakob Bjørn, it's your turn to give us perhaps an overview, being part of the team at GWO here. What do you see as the #1 benefit if you had to pick one of these?
Well, I don't really feel like picking one, because I see them all connecting, right? There's, of course, the industrial overview, the fact that we have something called weather downtime, right? How do we utilize all these hours where our technicians are perhaps waiting? So the efficient and flexible learning. But I would actually like to echo Brian a bit, because I think one of the areas that are really interesting and stands out with the digital training is the adaptive learning. So we see it today, those of us who have kids, so they use these apps for doing math online. So if they reply correctly to whatever math piece they're doing, they get one that's more difficult. If they fail at that, the app will keep them at the same level, etc. I think we have some very new opportunities that we can take in to the wind industry when it comes to digital learning, and I think the personalized learning is a key thing, and it also, as mentioned in Elizabeth's video, I mean, that's very much like, do you need time to sit down with something? Would you like to do something fast or in another order? I think the personalized learning gives them something that distinguishes digital learning from traditional face-to-face learning.
Well, thanks everybody for giving us some answers. You can see on the screen they're still coming up, and we'll share with you afterwards some graphics of the answers here, but you can see that there's actually a pretty big majority in favour of option 1, more efficient and flexible learning, and then an equal number of people have chosen the potential to reduce cost and time and also personalise learning. So these themes I expect will come up further in the panel discussion, and now we want to hear more from you guys. Our first question for the panel debate is going to be put on screen shortly. I'll just wait to switch over to the right slide. Brian, I'll start with you. How do you describe good training, and how can that concept be transferred into a digital environment?
I will for sure start with the fact that we need clearly defined learning objectives. Clearly defined learning objectives that reflects what the outcome of the training should be. I would also highlight the why part of what's in it for me. We call it the motivation factor, meaning opening up the participants for receiving learning. That should for sure be built into it, no matter which type of training it is we are talking about. I would say training that actively involves the participants, so a strong distinguish between what is lecture and what is actually training. And then, like mentioned already, training that respects different learning styles. Something for the listener, something for the visual person, something for self-reading, and last but not least, something with hands-on, and not necessarily hands-on physical tactile, but it could also be a quiz or whatever.
Elizabeth, you've shown us you've already implemented a concept of your own. The same question to you. Give us your own description of good training, and is it there in the case study for us, or do you have another suggestion?
Yeah, sure. Well, for me, it is that training needs to be well considered. Just like Brian is saying, what is it we want to achieve? What's the learning objectives here? And how do we meet them in the best possible way? But we also need to consider the prerequisites of the participants attending the course, because if you don't have the balance of what you want to achieve and the level of knowledge the guy or the girls brings into the room, well, then there will be an imbalance, and it will actually result in poor training. And then once you have all this established, it is, as well as Brian is saying, engaging the participants and making it interactive, so they don't sit and just listen, but that we keep them active. And that is what we have done, of course, in the Safety in Mind app, but also in all the other trainings that we are delivering with simulators. So, and then the last thing I want to say is also creating a dialogue in the training room is also what makes good training. There's so much knowledge and experience in the guys that are working out in the field. So bringing that into the classroom can also increase the level of the course outcome, to take that into the discussion and actually give value and credit to the knowledge they bring into the room.
Thanks, Elizabeth. Neil, again, same to you. Give me your ideas about good training and how, in your view, that could be transferred into a digital environment.
Thanks, Rolf. Yeah, echoing Brian and Elizabeth, and I think we're all in agreement that good training has got to be founded on well-defined and set learning objectives and outcomes. But in the first place, we need to make sure those objectives and outcomes are aligned to the competence we're trying to build within our employees and people, delegates who will be attending those training events. So that's vital. We also need to have knowledgeable instructors, trainers who have authority in the subject matter, who can convey the learning outcomes and objectives into tangible lesson delivery, but also, whilst they're doing that, recognizing the audience they have in terms of training delegates and being able to adapt their style of delivery accordingly. And I know we'll cover this a little bit more later. And it's that combination of looking at traditional training as we have it now, good quality theoretical elements supported by practical delivery that, again, that is applicable to the learning outcomes and the competence we're trying to achieve through this.
It's interesting you mentioned practical delivery. Then the next question goes a bit deeper. We want to ask the panel about the practical steps. Jakob Björn, I'll begin with you. Can you provide some advice on how training providers might approach things when switching to digital with a view on maintaining quality of learning?
Well, I think it connects a lot to what was said here already. What I at least got from it is that, well, the training needs to be relevant. So good training is relevant training, as it needs to go directly to the task at hand so you can do it efficiently and safely. And looking at that, there was a word on the former slide as well, is that said transfer. I mean, like, how do you go from your learning environment to doing what you need to do? And I think the practical steps, of course, is to identify which learning objectives can be delivered digitally, and then which needs to be in the practical realm, as Elizabeth actually explained with and was also shown in her video. So I think one of the key things when looking at this is to avoid doing a one-to-one transfer of, we used to do all the training in a practical training center, and then we kind of digitalize the practical delivery one-to-one. I think it's important to look at the effect you want to have, and then take the tool you need to deliver that effect. A good example is there's some firefighting training in, I think it's in Canada or somewhere, where they used augmented reality because they could build a suit that when you got closer to the virtual fire, it got hotter, etc. So I think to maintain the quality means you need to go through to, and this becomes a bit nerdy, but I'll risk it in this forum, but to do what we call a fidelity analysis. So figure out how lifelike the training needs to be for it to be able to be transferable, and also take each of the tasks and look at what we call the diff analysis. So how difficult is it? How important is it? And how often do we do it? Because that will establish how much weight and time and how we should deliver this in the digital environment. So I think there are some key elements in this, but the first and foremost, I think it's, let's not think of a one-to-one transfer from this is how it's done in a classroom, this is how it should be done in the virtual realm. Look at the effect you want to create.
Okay, thanks, Jakob. I'm going to jump over to the third question now, because it's one that we've touched upon in earlier points, which is about keeping things inclusive, and the survey that we asked the audience to participate in focused on personalisation. Neil, this question is of particular interest to you, I think.
Yeah, thanks, Ralph. Inclusive training is very important, and I think Brian touched on this in his response to the first question. You know, most of us involved in training in whatever sense that are joined today will absolutely know that everybody has a different learning style. They have different ways in which they adapt and approach and take on information. And that's really important to maintain through a traditional classroom delivery, be it theoretical or practical work. I feel it's a lot easier to remain inclusive in terms of the trainer and the training organisation doing that, because you can react there in a face-to-face setting and clearly see and understand different learning needs. But if we move that to a digital setting, and when we lose a bit of that personal touch, you know, how are we going to go about ensuring that we are remaining inclusive and we're providing high quality training and understanding to everyone that joins? Is it all about we give ownership to the training providers themselves to decide on the methods they use, the tools they use, because they probably know their client base best, be it cultural links or whatever? Or should more work be done at a GWO level, for example, in setting out requirements around digital options and tools that will support inclusivity? I suppose that's a question back to other people.
Yeah,
and I suppose it comes back to, very quickly, what Jakob was saying on the last question. You know, we've got to look at the learning objectives and the learning outcomes and mapping them to the digital delivery. Or do we go a step further and change learning objectives and learning outcomes to make them more aligned to digital delivery, ensuring we keep that inclusivity of learning throughout.
Right. Elizabeth, again, having been a sort of part of a pioneering project, did this topic, was it part of your thinking when you were developing the Safety in Mind solution?
Yeah, for sure it was, and this is also what you met with once you launch a new project, because people have different learning styles and different preferences. So providing a tool that is available on your phone, just that creates, of course, challenges for people that prefer to have it on a computer and so on. So yes, we of course discussed all these elements in our concepts. And taking away exactly whether you can get it on a mobile or a tablet or a phone, then looking into the content of the app, we believe that the fact that we have provided the quick learnings, if you memorize things just by seeing a couple of words and then know what it's about, well then we cater for that. If you need to read more in depth, we have included that as well. We interact with people by the way they need to learn throughout the app with the different bite-sized learnings, where they either need to organize or play a game or whatever it is. So for sure it was an element of that, and has also been with the rest of the simulators and so on that we have developed. Again, as Jacob is saying, you can't transfer one-to-one from classroom to a digital environment. You need to adjust the content, and again, what is it you want to achieve, and then look into, okay, what learning technologies can actually help me achieve these learning objectives, so I can keep the involvement and engagement with the participants throughout the training.
Thanks, Elizabeth. So same kind of topic to you, Brian. Also, I think it's worth pointing out that MHI Vestas is not the only organisation that's delivering a digitalised training framework. It's just that they've launched a BSTR blended learning application. But Vestas delivers plenty of training in digital frameworks. So this issue of inclusivity and adapting to the needs of the student must have been a part of your considerations as well, Brian.
Yeah, it for sure has. One of the things we have talked a lot about in our training environment has been this adaptive approach. One thing that has troubled our mind a bit is that especially refresher trainings tend to be historical, the same training as the original training, which is for sure not very motivating for a participant, at least not for myself, I can say. So we actually, on some of the refresher e-learnings we built, we took also this adaptive approach, where we started measuring the knowledge of the participants, and depending on if they were able to answer it, why spend more time on it. Where on the other side, if there was a topic they were not able to answer, then we should cover the full theory behind it. So for sure, a big quality improvement seen with my eyes and seen here from Vestas using the adaptive approach.
Okay. So the final question, at least those that we have, directed to the panel before we ask you, the audience, to start asking questions to them, is maybe the most important question of the today, which is how training providers should move forwards. Jakob Björn, again, let's go to you. What should be some of the first steps that a training provider should take? It, perhaps what you hinted at in your previous answer.
Well, I think it's to sit down and, first and foremost, of course, I mean, I guess there's a given, ensure that there's a market for the product that you're going to go with. But looking at it is to start with, and I think it's kind of echoed with all the replies today, to map out what learning objectives and how those learning objectives should be framed, can be delivered in what way. So if you take each learning objective, have a look at it, say, okay, what media can we do? Can we deliver this in? But also not only what it can be delivered in, but also how it can be verified that the participant has actually achieved that learning objective. Because you can have this consideration that, well, we can deliver this using this technology, but you need to think in the instructor element of it as well, be it if it's an app or whatever it is, but how do we verify that that knowledge has been conveyed? and received by the participant. So doing that for each learning objective is key, and then mapping out how of course it should be done. I think it's really important when working with let's call it, quite often digitalization ends out in a blended approach. Be sure to look at, well, what is the learning retention rate when we start doing theory, perhaps in a digital realm? When should the practical elements happen, and how do we connect the dots on that? Should we, when they meet up, as I know some are doing, well, you did the first of the blended part, now let's have an initial test, or Brian, as you say, we verify their level, and then we focus on what they need. So going through an analysis is really important on the learning objectives, and then figuring out this is what we think can be digitalized, this is the effect we want, and then look at the technologies to deliver that.
So can I chip in here?
Of course you can, yeah.
Because when you created the BSTRP, the partial mitigation measure that we created back in April, very early on, we chose virtual classroom as the digital technology that to be used, because we were fairly confident that almost all training providers would be able to use GoToWebinar like this or Skype or whatever, and have that technology. So that was a limitation for us, but it also has some consequences towards the learning. And I'm just reflecting here, because when we started talking about digitalization many years ago, we thought it was because the driver was because it could be more efficient and more cheap, and we really got it started because of a safety imperative. We had to do it because of COVID. But what we're hearing from MHI and from Vestas and then from others is that what we actually have is we can create better learning applying different kinds of technologies. So it's not just cheap, it's also better. But if we think about carefully what technology we use for what, the virtual classroom is maybe not the best way, but could be for some objectives.
Yes, I agree. And I think some of the things that happens when you have a change of pace is that you start to challenge your own methodology. Virtual classroom, yes, it's a technology, but what is embedded in using a virtual classroom, and we also did, by the way, a guideline on how we believe that should be done. But it it provides a setting where it's the natural thing is to flip the classroom. And as soon as you flip a classroom, then you get a higher participation, you get a better learning and retention rate, you get a lot of good things actually out of being in that context. And a traditional training delivery, maybe sometimes there's not as much focus on flipping the classroom and engaging your participants, but because it's digital classroom or virtual classroom, the instructors are very focused on that. They're perhaps also more focused on, we need more breaks so people have a clear mind. Because we're sitting in front of a screen. So let's do more breaks. So they're actually more ready to take in knowledge instead of perhaps doing 2-hour sessions back to back with theory. So I think it's been a good process, and it's brought up reflections of how things can be done differently and better.
And I guess that is in some way reflected by the audience's responses to those 5 options, was that a more efficient or flexible way of delivering learning can perhaps aid concentration, or that can be one of the outputs from it. Neil, same point to you before we move on to audience questions. If you were talking to a training provider, what advice would you give to them about taking some practical steps to move forward?
Sure, yeah. So partially echoing Jakob's point, I think it's really important to reviewing the standard outcomes and objectives, and then looking at digital options that can be used to support delivery that, as opposed to maybe taking a predefined digital option because we know as a training provider we're good at that, and then somehow squeezing the training standard into that digital option, which might not be the best outcome. So certainly looking at it that way. Where possible, identifying customers and your normal client base in the design of any digitalization strategy to get feedback that could well address the inclusivity issue we spoke about before. But very much taking a blended learning approach, being open-minded, looking at all the different strategies, options, tools, applications are available, and mapping them to the objectives, and looking at how best to deploy them.
Okay, so we've gone through the sort of main part of our panel discussion now, and a few questions have already come in, and as I was beginning, please type in your questions into the box, and we'll come to them as they arrive. But first up, what we would like to do is I'm going to call out the name of the person whose question we've chosen right now, and we'll ask you to turn on your microphone and ask the panel directly. So just we'll begin with Ian Smith, because it's quite an interesting question that he's asked specifically. Ian, can you hear us? Could you turn your microphone on and
yeah, can you hear me okay?
Yeah, hi Ian. Just tell us where you're from.
Hi, everyone. Yeah, so my question relates to how we tend to measure people's physical reactions within training. So we can gauge people's competence, but can we measure their heart rate, their perspiration rate, and use those fields to start to track, I guess, someone's profile to another level, to the next extent almost?
Interesting question.
Do we feel that's something which is coming, is not necessary, or is I know in VR it's kind of being explored at the moment.
Brian, let's throw this one at you. Measuring the physical reactions of a participant while they're involved in a training program. Any thoughts?
My thought is, for sure, technology will involve on this, and I won't try and predict what will happen, but I can for sure say that one of the important things that we also realized when we started reacting to the COVID-19, conducting remote training, is that a simple thing like the system you choose for remote training, it's essential that you can see your participants, example given. Without being able to see your participants, how can you then assess their sense of emotion? Where are they? How do they feel? Are they comfortable? Are they disconnected? So I think that connects very well to the question here. So strong focus to the system choice or the platform for delivery. I actually think it also brought changes to some of the systems. If I remember correct, then Teams used to be able to display, was it 4 persons on the screen, where during COVID-19 that was quite fast-tracked and got extended to 9, since most classroom sessions or remote team sessions was bigger than 4 participants. So yeah, that would be my answer to that.
Yes. Can I add a tiny comment to that?
Yeah, go
ahead. I think it's always the interesting question for me is, of course, can it be done is interesting. I mean, but I'd always like to start with why. Why do we want to measure it? What are we going to use it for? Off the top of my head, well, we could use things like that in GWO portfolio for first aid or working at heights, showing how fatigued you actually get. How long can you do CPR? Kind of build on the logic and emphasize learning objectives and have participants understand what it actually takes by showing their data when they're performing specific tasks, when you're rescuing somebody from height or you're lifting a dummy, things like that. So, but I think it's always, and this goes a lot to what Elizabeth said earlier, let's look at the effect we want to have, and then we can figure out what tools should we use for that. But as Brian is saying, yes, we can measure everything, and it will move faster than we possibly know. But yeah. I'd like to ask the question why first.
Elizabeth, can you imagine a scenario why?
Yes, I can, because it's actually something we are considering as well, or maybe more in the economical part of things, manual handling, that if you actually put something on people that will give a result in terms of, are you lifting in the correct way, are you doing and are you doing a movement right now which is not good for your body, and so on. So this is something we are looking into, so you could actually give that feedback to the participants while they're doing their exercises and evaluate that afterwards. And also the mannequins and so on we're using for the first aid and CPR training, they give feedback to the person doing the CPR. Are you doing the pressure good enough, and so on. We're also looking into augmented reality possibilities in this respect, to get it more again realistic to life. So yes, I believe more of that will be coming as well, and there are opportunities where you could benefit the participants of giving this knowledge.
Let's just stick with this just for one final response from Neil, because you know, competence is a core part of your professional life, you know, assessing the competence of your workforce. And I think the question originally was, you know, could this kind of data feedback help you assess competence? Have you got any thoughts on this?
It's a very good question, and probably a difficult one to give a very short answer to. Yeah, you know, the realms of technology are increasing daily in terms of the ability of what to do. You've got to consider what's actually practical in a learning environment. Does technology take over and be a distraction from the core task of, you know, giving knowledge and skills to individuals to develop their competence? It could maybe be used quite effectively in pilot programs to develop digitalized training methods in the first place. I'd probably, until technology is proven, tested, and deemed to be as efficient as possible, you'd probably err on the side of caution of, you know, as what Jakob said, why would you need to use it in a training environment? Would it add to a distraction? But certainly in the design of training packages for digital delivery, I can see it could be beneficial, going back to supporting, you know, the competence requirements.
Yeah. Unless we've got any more thoughts on that, we'll move on to our next question. I'm going to ask, forgive me if I pronounce the name incorrectly, Mert Utkan Demerici. You had a question about how first-timers, you know, and people who are coming into training for the first time should be dealt with. Could you just ask your question to us again, if you're online? No. Okay. So, unfortunately,
yes, I'm here.
Oh yes, thank you. Hi there.
Yeah, I was. Hello. I was just curious about the first attendees, how they'll develop the practical side of the virtual training, because in some part they need to get some practice to how to hang the, for instance, tough tag, or to use lanyards.
Yeah. Jakob Björn, do you have an answer for this question?
Well, maybe I get a reflection at least. I mean, I think we have a digital requirement in place to kind of set the framework for, if you want to digitalize something, how to do that. What we've seen so far is very much a blended approach, both on the refresher, and others are actually starting to do a blended approach on the BST full package, and I believe some other trainings in the near future. So yes, I think there will be, for now at least, a lot of different exercises and things that needs to be done practically, just to get the tactile elements in, and the feeling when you torque a bolt, you need to figure out, okay, now my tool is actually put on, this is the resistance, this is how much I need to pull, etc. Doing that virtually, it needs to be done really well, if it's feasible at all. So yes, with taglines and other things, I agree. For me, in my scope, it seems that needs to be done face to face. But again, the world is evolving. Let's see what's going to happen in the future. You'll see, and I mentioned this example with the Canadian firefighters earlier, where when they go near the fire, the suit gets hot. When they turn up the hose on, or the power on the water hose gets stiff and impossible to move. I think the world is ahead of us, and we'll figure out what happens. But for now, blended learning seems to be the go-to for our training providers, at least. And let's see if that is challenged in the future. But that's kind of what I see, at least for the foreseeable future. And that means, to your point, some things will be done in person.
Yeah. So we're going to move on to another few questions, because we've got 10 minutes left, and we've got one more opportunity to ask the audience in a quick survey question before we finish. I'm going to ask Jesper Jontnu to ask a question. Jesper, can you speak to the panel?
Yes, do you hear me?
Yes, we do.
Okay, perfect. Looking at this from a competency side, actually the standard as we know it, we try to fit digital into some sort of standard that already exists. So we try to fit a foot into a shoe which we have defined the size. It's the incorrect way of doing it from a competency perspective, if you ask me. Looking at that, what MHI Vestas has done is actually quite brilliant, looking at from this gamification personalized side of things. However, this could actually be a very big part of refresher training. Of course, we are not looking into 2-year cycles. We're looking into a ongoing cycle with micro trainings, ongoing, popping up maybe once a week, a micro training done by some sort of digital device. How do we then verify the practicals? Well, in my opinion, the best way of doing that is actually doing some sort of scenario exercise where you verify, have they understood what they have learned? And the only thing you can do that is by observing, quite simple. Much of the standard, however, I know the refresher part is I show you and you do. It's not much reflective here. If we want our employees in the industry to become better and to reduce the retention curve, we need to look at refresher training from a completely different perspective. Else we just start all over again.
So thanks, Jesper, for that question / opinion. So I'll pass it over to you, Elizabeth, because it sounded like there was some praise for the way you're doing it. Just remind us again of how Safety in Mind connects to the example that Jesper just gave.
Yeah, great, and thank you very much, Jesper, for your comment here. So again, yes, we believe that doing the theoretical bite-sized training available to you all the time, that should retain your knowledge in terms of the theoretical training. And then when we invite people in for the practical training, this is where we have combined all the modules, because you hardly never have to do a rescue from height if you don't always have to do some sort of first aid with the person that is probably injured. And while doing that, you also need to consider your manual handling. So we saw the opportunity to make it more realistic by creating these scenarios that could happen in real life. And one of the things that I also hear you say a little bit, Jesper, that we have taken into consideration is the way our people do it. We don't believe that teaching them step by step, you need to do a rescue like this, that will help them the day they are in the situation out in the turbine. So what our instructors are doing is they actually look at the individuals to see, are they doing this rescue in a safe manner? And as long as they do it in a safe manner, it doesn't matter exactly how they do it, as long as it's safe. And thereby it becomes more embedded in the people as well, the way you do it. And hopefully, should they ever be in a situation, well, then they don't try to remember how was I told in my training, but it will come naturally to them. I know I can do this in a safe way. So that's at least how we have tried to accommodate that.
Thanks, Elizabeth. A quick couple of final thoughts from you, Brian, on this topic, the adjustment or the look at competence in this approach.
Yeah, for me personally, the key here is the blended learning approach. We are also not looking at taking any classroom course and then just digitalize it as a whole. We are very much focused on the blended approach, like Jacob also talked to. There are tactile elements where, honestly speaking, today I don't believe that the technology is mature enough to take care of all these. And I also think on top of that, we need to remember we should have a holistic view of training. It's not like when we have people in a classroom and we train them for one day, that then we can send them out on site and they master that topic from one end to the other. They still need to get.
Just lost a little bit of audio there from you, Brian. Neil, perhaps you can just quickly give us some final remarks about this topic.
Sorry, I'm just having problems with my. Can you hear me? Okay.
Yes, we can.
Yes, very quite a few interesting points there. I'll just go back to the very first point you arranged in terms of we have our defined learning objectives and outcomes, and we need to be careful not to try and squeeze a digitalization strategy into that doesn't really work. You know, the outcomes and objectives have been set to ensure we have competent and trained competent people to do their jobs safely. We need to make sure they can be achieved. So any digitalisation strategy needs to ensure we achieve the learning outcomes and objectives in a way, as opposed to compromising on them just for the sake of bringing in a certain type of digital technology to do that. And you know, that's up for us as GWO and training providers themselves to address that and make sure, you know, we all play a role in that.
Yeah. Okay, so we've got 3 more minutes before we sign off today. So this is the final opportunity for you, the audience, to give us a little bit more feedback with one more poll. So could you do the same as before? Go to menti.com and type in the code 246641. This is the previous word cloud that we have on screen at the moment. We'll just switch to the next one. Yeah, 246641. Again, we want to just find out what your opinion is about digital delivery as part of your training mix in the near future. Is it very likely? Is it definitely not going to happen? Undecided? And we'll be able to feed that back to everybody. So hopefully this is going to start moving around on screen. Yep, interesting. So we've got a majority saying definitely yes. We'll again be able to feed back after this webinar about the composition of the audience as well. You've all been kind enough to give us information about yourselves, what kind of businesses you're from. So I believe last time I looked, it was around about sort of 70% were from the training provider community. So this should be a decent representative sample. While it's on screen, Jakob, any sort of concluding remarks about what we've heard today from the panel?
Yeah, I think I've learned a lot here, and at least also doing sort of a mental status of where are we on the digitalization and why are we here.
Yeah.
And as I mentioned before, at some point it seemed like digitalization was something we were going to do because it's cheaper and more efficient. But it's certainly clear to me after today that it's not just that, it's actually because we can do something that's a better fit and better learning for individual personal learning styles. Even if the imperative was COVID, we are actually in quite a good place. And to Jesper's last point, surely it is the technologies means that the theoretical elements that we do in an app or whatever we do means that it can be refreshed not just every 2 years, but every week if we want. So there is an evolution in the way we do things. I just want to remind you, Jesper, that it's a minimum training standard, and it has to be some kind of a standard. Of course, you can deliver a service to your customers that's over and beyond, but every 2 years, this is where we refresh. That's a refresher cycle, so everyone can trust that everybody's up to speed at the same time.
Yeah.
No, it's quite interesting, and looking at the numbers, I'm just looking at the numbers here.
31 responses on there.
31 responses, meaning 2 or 3 have said probably not. Nobody definitely not, and everybody else is in the underside or in potentially and definitely yes.
Yeah.
So it confirms what I had thought before, that digitalization, digital delivery, blended learning solutions are here to stay and will be part of our future.
Yeah.
And
I guess it stands to reason that if you're joining a webinar on digitalization, then you do have some interest in the topic. So perhaps there's an inherent bias in our results. But we're going to sign off in a few seconds. So thank you for joining us today. But this, as you hopefully know, is the first of 3 webinars on digitalization. Today we dealt with maintaining quality of learning. Next week, we're going to focus on quality in certification. So we're holding a webinar in the same format, but with a new group of guests, including two certification bodies and representatives from the Audit and Compliance Committee who are going to help guide you through some of the activities that have gone on, particularly in the delivery of remote audits, which have been allowed as in certain circumstances as a part of digital delivery and recertifications of existing training portfolios. So that will be really useful if you're an organisation who is on the path towards digitalising some of your training, and we look forward to welcoming you to that next week. Just go to our events page if you haven't registered already, and you'll get reminders.
We also have to remind ourselves to say thank you to our panelists, to Neil, to Brian, to Elizabeth. Thank you very much for contributing and participating. Normally we would give you flowers or chocolate at the end of the panel, but you were virtually. I'll send you a hug here. Thank you very much for participating, contributing to this discussion. And Jakob, you get paid, so, but thank you anyway.
All right. Thanks very much, everybody. Bye.
Bye. Turn off the